Kurt Streeter, welcome. Good to have you joining us here in Seattle, where you live, even though you work for the New York Times. That's a pretty good gig. Nice job,
Yeah,
huh?
no,
Eh,
no, I'm not complaining one bit. Great to see you, Enrique.
Good to see you too. Well, when you heard about the John Gruden emails and everything that came out about that, were you surprised?
In one sense, I was surprised because I don't think anybody thought John Gruden. I did not have the reputation of somebody that would be saying the sorts of things that he said on the emails and in his casual banter that was caught off air. He's been such a face for the league for so long, from the time when he won the Super Bowl coaching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to as many years as as a color analyst on Monday Night Football, and you just certainly didn't think of him in this way. But on the other hand, I'm not surprised because we've seen over the years that people's public personas and their private selves. I mean, that can be two different things, particularly on the race front, and particularly when we're talking about issues like homophobia and all sorts of the thing, misogyny, and all sorts of the things that sort of were exposed in these emails.
Mhm. Okay, so the NFL now is nearly 70% black, right? As far as the players. Do you think any of those players were surprised?
I think there probably are some players. Again, it's sort of like what I was saying. I think there are probably players who have been very close to Coach Gruden and don't see him and are surprised that he would have that side of him or at that side of him. But I don't think that I would be surprised if there are African American players in the league who are shocked to find out that there's a sort of two-faced quality among some of the higher ups, particularly white higher ups and non-African American higher ups that they have to deal with, and just in daily life. There's a wariness that you develop, I think, as an African American in this society, and that you're always kind of on guard for this sorts of thing to happen, because sometimes it happens in your personal life, sometimes it happens in your professional life. It could be your neighbors, it could be so many different things that where this sort of thing, not necessarily regarding emails, but you find out that somebody has very different ideas than what they've been showing you personally. That's a commonplace thing.
Much has been made of the fact that it's the Raiders and the Raiders who've had that, image of the Renegades and the team, led by Al Davis for so many years that challenged the NFL, and that Al Davis was much about inclusion. With, if you look at the record of the fact that he had hired the first black coach, Tom Flores also as a Latino coach, Jim Plunkett as a Latino. A lot of people didn't know that he was Latino, but that he had a track record for inclusion. So I suppose that was the one thing that shocked people more than anything else, that the Raiders of all teams, and you have this guy leading the team.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that is a part of the story, no doubt. That surprise that an institution or an organization that has a pretty remarkable track record in terms of its inclusion, and also having female executives at the very top ranks in every way. I mean, the fact that they were in Oakland for so many years, which is one of the more diverse cities in the country, very diverse fan base. Certainly, Al Davis has been known as being progressive, and I think his son Mark Davis, who owns the Raiders now, has a similar sort of track record. But I don't think that I'm willing to bet that Mark Davis was fairly blindsided by this. It just goes to show you how tough this sort of thing is to root out in our society, and even well-meaning people, even well-meaning and organizations that have positive track records can you know, it can end up hiring people like this,
Yeah.
and not
Well,
and unknowingly. I don't think that they knew.
yeah. I mean, it's heartening to me that Mark Davis actually acted as quickly as he did, because I mean, the guy is like a clown, right? I mean, the haircut and all the other stuff. I mean, let's face it. You look at him, you can't take him seriously. But I got a lot of respect for him. The fact that he stepped up right away, within the 24-hour cycle, he did his homework and made the decision. So, hats off to, well, like rugs off to him or whatever his hat is, whatever that thing on his head is.
It's kind of a friar look,
I don't know what it is.
I know. So, Kurt, have you met John Gruden over the years?
I have not met John Gruden. No, I don't cover the NFL extensively, and I never have. So I kind of pop in and out of that world. And the coach that I know best is Pete Carroll here in Seattle, and I know him from really my time in Los Angeles when he was the coach at USC. So, I know from what I know from my colleagues, he's got a pretty solid reputation, though.
Well, it's interesting. Football has a real interesting racial dynamic, right? I mean, a lot of the star players, a lot of the strongest players are black players on the field, But if you go to like the South and those stadiums are filled with white people that probably would never invite any of those players to dinner, right? I mean, they root for them, but when it comes down to racial kind of lines and stuff, I kind of get where they're going to fall. And so it's always been an interesting dynamic to me that you have the players on the field and you have the fans, but they don't ever meet, right? I mean, it's almost like plantation owners. I mean, to be really crass about it, right? I mean, only they're compensated now once they get to the NFL. But there has always been that dynamic to me.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not just the NFL though. I mean, it's most pro sports. I mean, the fans in the stands are predominantly white because I mean it's certainly very expensive to go to an NBA game, and so if you go to Major League Baseball doesn't have nearly sort of representation that the NFL and NBA have, but if you go to any MLB stadium in the country, it's going to be predominantly white. I mean, these folks, I think that a lot of them, you said they wouldn't have them over to dinner. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I think when it comes to having personal, close relationships with them, there's often, whether they would let these guys date their daughters, sort of, like that's I mean, like that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. I mean, how close are you willing? Is a certain segment of society willing to be to another segment of society? So yeah.
So
it's not just in the South.
So reflecting back, when Colin Kaepernick took that knee to where we are today, where are we at? Because people bring that up, but what are the connections? I mean, what does this all say?
Well, I think that we are clearly much more willing to discuss these issues and to have these issues out front, and they are not going away. It's almost impossible. You cannot say separate sports from the rest of life really anymore. And I think Colin Kaepernick and those protests and the protests all around that time and that continued have just sort of burst that bubble, burst the mythology of sports, that it's this sort of pure set apart world where, there used to be that folks like myself would write about these sorts of things and people would just freak out that you were writing about society through sports. And now it's just commonplace. Of course, we're going to examine how our society is through one of its primary cultural institutions. Sort of the religion of our society right now is the sports world. So I think that, in some sense, it's again, there's nuance to it, because in a very real sense, there's not progress. In that, look at the NFL. There's 3 black head coaches right now. There might be some, there's more coordinators than before and all that, but it's still a huge imbalance. Colin Kaepernick is not playing. Eric Reed is not playing. There are still players who should be playing right now, but they have been, let's just face it, they've been blackballed by the league. They're kept out of the league because of their stance. So, in one sense, we have made very little negligible progress. But in another way, we are much more able to discuss these issues. We're much more sophisticated about looking at them. They're much more part of the public dialogue. And I think that that's a super important first step. Change takes a long time. And I think having this stuff out in the open talking about it, hashing it out, and hey, we have a super fractured society right now. That's just the way it has to be. We'll see where it all ends up.
I'm curious, as a journalist and working for the New York Times of all places, how did what is happening in sport today and the issue of race and other things, um, how did how important now, or how did that become important for the Times to say, we got to really put some focus on this? And, was it what was happening, or the fact that sports represents real life in America today?
Yeah, well, I would say that the paper. Now, I've been there since 2018. I think there was a real, there has been a real effort to, and it's not nearly complete, but a real effort to be much more diverse and have many more diverse voices, and much more racial diversity, much more all sorts of, gender diversity, all sexual orientation diversity. This is a whole push within the paper, and I think that the Times sports section operates in a little different manner. At least it has since I've been in the section, than say many of the other sports sections of sports or news organizations. In that we are definitely looking at these connections. We are not nearly just focused on just the games and what happened in the games. We're definitely interested in a much broader conversation. And that, I think, is also reflective of our readership. Our readership tends to be the people that want to read about those sorts of things. And so I think we have a sort of special thing going in that way. And I know the leadership of our section, the leadership of the paper is very excited to see that kind of coverage and commentary from people like me, and along with solid analysis. But we're not a huge operation in the sports section, but we pick our spots, and we pick our spots carefully, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. A little bit different than a lot of the other.
So then, in covering this story about Gruden, and what it means, which is what I would take you really are going to be focusing on, what do you look at next? Or will you be looking at something next?
Right. Well, so from my standpoint, I'm the Sports of the Times columnist right now. Right. So I'm kind of the generalist columnist, where I bounce around all different sorts of subjects. So I'm not necessarily covering that issue full time, not at all, as a matter of fact. So that's left up to our NFL beat writers, and they're the ones that Ken Belson, the lead writer, lead reporter that helped uncover all of this and the emails. So he's much more involved in the day-to-day. I'll pick my spots and carefully weigh in when needed. And more from me, it's more about kind of a 30,000 foot view, looking down on the broader meaning. And I can't really say what I will write or when I will weigh in. It's just in the future. It sort of depends on what happens and how things shake out. I popped in on the NFL again on a Raiders story when their defensive player Carl Nassib came out, became the first openly gay active player in the NFL. And so I just did a quick turnaround column on the meaning of that and the importance of that, and where we might be headed in terms of that sort of very important landmark.
So do you think, people say that, the media has a short memory. Do you think Gruden is going to resurrect himself at some point, or do you think that guy is perpetual toast now? I mean, he's just done.
I would say never say never these days. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard for me to imagine right now him working in any sort of serious capacity with the league, or I just think the uproar would be huge. I could see him possibly, in the media sphere, maybe latching on with, particularly maybe somebody like Fox. I don't know. And again, in the media world, it's so you can sort of be your own. You can have your own podcasts. You can have your own. I could see him out there doing his thing in an individual way, where he's sort of the boss, and he would probably have a pretty big following. So it's hard to say. I think again more of that kind of official capacity with the league.
I'm just
Uh,
wondering if his ego is such that he needs that adoration. Because, some guys would just say, okay, I've made the money. I'm just going to live my life. But if this guy, he's sort of Trump like and that public adulation is something he craves, something he needs, I'm not sure
yeah,
because he was in the spotlight most of his career.
yeah, and it's also hard, I think, for a lot of folks like that to really admit that they were wrong or that they caused any real pain or they had any issue. They sort of tend to personalities like that often, at least I don't really know Gruden, but those sorts of personalities, in my experience, they're not going to really necessarily deeply take it's kind of self-inventory and stand back and think, oh man, I really screwed up. They're much more inclined to say, society's wrong for banishing me or what, and I'm going to come back. I don't know. It's going to be. I certainly. I would be very surprised if he works again.
I would think that he's going to need to do a lot of soul searching because I mean he is a husband and a father, and there's a lot there that maybe he needs to do to look at himself. But and Matt and I were talking about this earlier. I played sports. Obviously, I never played professional sports. I didn't have that ability or the size or anything like that. But the coaches that I had growing up, the types of things that Gruden said, they would say to us. Oh, yeah. It was a commonplace thing. I told Matt, I told the story to other people before. I had a coach in junior high, and other coaches picked up on it because I guess they just thought it was a good name, and they would call me Tar Baby. And as much as I hated that, but I was a teenager, and you're in this environment of where you're trying to fit in, and they also are the leadership figures, and or in some cases the father figures, so you don't try to buck them in a way. But to me, there's something deeper about all of this, that because you coaching, and it's like being an educator in a way. I mean, you're leading young people, or even in this case, at the professional level, people are making a lot of money. But that the fact that at least we're taking this on to talk about it, and it's come out in such a big way, I think it needs to happen because it's very telling about our society. I mean, you have a young son. What do you tell him?
Don't be like that.
Well, yeah.
Not at all. I mean, yeah, it is cultural. I mean, every sport has its own individual culture, and then sports in general has its own culture, and then our broader culture. But within the culture of football, of course, it's a very macho, tough,
hyper macho, right?
I mean, those kinds of things being said, I mean, in a way, it's just totally casual, throw it out. Let's just be real. I mean, those sorts of things get said, and definitely were when we were, I'm 54, so when I was growing up, absolutely. And then the race stuff that I had to deal with from those coaches, predominantly white coaches.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not exactly like, black coaches are also part of that culture. I mean, they may not be saying the exact same things, but let's say homophobia.
Right.
I mean, rampant. And it's
the
same thing in baseball and
the misogyny. Let's face it, the misogyny is all over the place. I mean, if you're talking guys, they're going to be talking that stuff. So there's no doubt about it. But it just seems to me that it's time to take a hard look at the whole coaching mentality, because
it's toxic. Yes. Coaching, the whole thing, even beyond coaching, there is an element to sports that is extremely toxic. And it's funny. People always say, well, sports builds character, and sports, I want my kid to play sports because they're going to learn to be a better human. And well, not necessarily. I played sports at a very serious level. I was like, I was a world ranked athlete.
As a tennis player, yes.
Yeah, tennis player and Division I athlete. And I mean, absolutely. You know what? When I got out of sports, I had to retrain myself in how to and I had to really take a look at some of the ways that I thought because of that world. And and that's tennis. And it could be even like sort of how you're treated or how you are. The privileges that you get because you're an athlete on, let's say, on a big campus or any campus, where you're looked up to, and then, and what that can do to you. It's not all the ideal and the myth of sports is this beautiful character building thing. I wouldn't say it's. I think that there are instances when it's that way, definitely, and there are coaches that are great teachers, and there are moments, and while I talked about the toxicity, there were also great things that I learned, but for me personally, I had to weed out a lot of that, after I got out of that world, and it's just a truism. That's a big issue.
Yeah. So let's bring this closer to home.
Yeah.
So where does the Seahawks rank as far as enlightenment in the kind of just the culture of the team and the spectrum of the NFL? I mean, are they kind of in the middle? Are they a little bit more enlightened, or just so people can relate to see how the Seahawks operate versus, let's say, the Raiders?
Again, I don't cover the Seahawks full time. I'm in and out with them, so I have to offer that caveat. I would say my experience with Pete Carroll is that he is one of the most enlightened of the coaches that I've ever met, especially in the big time sports world. He's an out of the box thinker. Pete has his critics. I think the way he goes about things in so many ways is, light years ahead of the old school, put down people kind of. He's not about that. At least the Pete that I know. I mean, who knows? I would be shocked if I saw emails from him that were like this or some other side of him. But no, I think he sets the tone, as far as I know, with that organization. So, I would put the Seahawks right up at the top, along with the Golden State Warriors. Steve Kerr is another guy that I've been around a decent amount in their coaching staff. That's just sort of a cut above in terms of how they think about their sport and about the world. And, it shows up in ways, from just the small ways to, like, if you go to a Seahawks practice, the coaches don't yell, really. Pete does not want the coaches to be yellers and screamers and berating his players. He doesn't, you can make a point without dragging somebody down.
Right.
And at least that I've seen, I know that that's one of his tenets. And I would be surprised to see a coach, that old school coach, yelling and screaming and putting people down and putting them in their place and denigrating them. He's not about that. That's a small way that, that's just one little way.
Yeah, but that's a huge thing.
It is a huge thing because, that's your confidence. I know that when I played sports, I played for those guys that were the screamers, the yellers,
they're massive.
the college names, as I mentioned. And, the coaches that I did respond to were the ones that really were teachers. And in a way, they look to motivate you by really kind of encouraging and talking. They were firm, and I didn't mind that, but that's who I could respond to. And I think that that's an important thing, particularly in the psyche of people today. That's everybody that needs that kind of, we all need it. Every day. So that's. Do you think the Gruden situation, I suppose, will it make any difference in the world of sports today? Because obviously it's a big story and it comes out, and even these other coaches around the country, taking positions either on whether to take the vaccine or to how they are handling a championship team and handling players that are, committing sexual assaults or domestic violence, these types of things. Will it make a difference
Yes.
in.
Yes. And here, sometimes I think when we get kind of siloed, or we drill down on these sorts of stories and we think, well, it didn't really make that much difference. But take them all together, it moves society along. Again, when we're talking about it, when we're thinking about it, when we're hashing it out, when we see the repercussions, the WSU coach may lose his job. Then Gruden has lost his job. These sorts of things matter in the long run. Look back to the 60s and these sorts of, in the 60s, Jim Owens at University of Washington had all of these run-ins with his black players, and then in the 60s, early 70s, and there was a black player boycott at the UW football team, and Owens sort of ended up kind of hobbling through to the end of his career. My impression was kind of broken by that, in a way. And those things then end up mattering because society takes stock of that. And it wasn't just happening in Jim Owens and the UW, but this was happening on these sorts of things were happening on campuses all over the place. This larger conversation, and in the end, the wheels of change started happening. So you couldn't have these kinds of coaches like you had in the 50s and 60s that forced, let's say, the black players you couldn't wear an afro, or you couldn't have an afro. You had to you couldn't wear bell bottoms or whatever it was, all sorts of crazy things that they were asking players to do, demanding, mandating the players to do. You couldn't protest, in the 60s during the on campus, or all sorts of things. And so it's just each story is a part of a conversation. And sometimes I think, to me, the progress is just nice and uphill, and then things change, and then sometimes it dips down a little bit. But I think we're on the right curve, and I think the people are gonna think twice. They better think twice before they spew that kind of stuff on emails, and maybe they will continue to say those sorts of things, but maybe they're gonna think about it a little bit more, and then maybe the next generation comes and it's the next generation of coaches says, we don't want to be like those dinosaurs anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it all adds up together, brick by brick. And so I tend to take a positive view of all of this stuff in the end,
Well, to be honest, I'm glad it did come out. And I don't, because I do think that that attitude and those types of things have no place in sports or any place else. Chris Streeter, New York Times. Thanks for joining us.